We have 4 speakers that are going to continue some of the things that were discussed this morning, and some new ideas, some new things that haven't been discussed before, ranging from, you might say, the interface between medicine and theology and even artificial intelligence. So without further ado, we want to give the speakers as much time as possible. Our first speaker is Samuel Brown, who is a assistant professor of pulmonary and critical care medicine, and also of medical ethics and humanities at the Intermountain Health Medical Center and the University of Utah. And he has also published some LDS writings and a book, as I recall. I can't remember the name right.
The most recent book is First Principles and Ordinances.
First Principles and Ordinances. And so he has some, I think, some rather, brings some unique expertise to this discussion, and we'll turn the time over to Sam.
It's good to be with you on what appears to be climatologically the first day of spring. Become a little cold intolerant, so I'm still wearing my free insignia vest from work. But it's hot enough I had to kill some rose bushes for my wife this morning. My current project in Mormon studies is thinking through Charles Taylor. He's a notable Catholic philosopher and theologian on the sly, who's thought about the world that we inhabit now, and he's called it a secular age. And he means it in a slightly different sense than you might see on regular network television. And I want to introduce just a little bit about what he means by the secular age, or secularity, and then think about 2 approaches to what some call deification, making gods of humans. And I want to counterpose the secular deification project to what I understand to be the Latter-day Saint deification project, and try to puzzle through with you in a very preliminary way some of what it might mean. The death of God, those of you that were awake at all during freshman year of college, while someone was pontificating about Nietzsche, Foucault, and all the rest, will have heard that God is dead. May even have seen a cute t-shirt, God is dead Nietzsche, and Nietzsche is dead God. Favorite a lot of people. And that Nietzsche and the death of God is wrapped up in what Taylor identifies as the secular age. And I want to think about secular deification in that sense. Once God is dead, someone has to fill the void. And in secularism, the void has been filled by the individual human being. And then I want to think about Mormon deification and an approach to understanding it that I hope will be illuminating in some way. And I'm going to confess to you that these are still ideas that I'm trying to work through and understand. I'm never a terribly dogmatic person. I'm particularly non-dogmatic here. I'm hoping to understand a little bit better, in part in conversation with you. And for some reason, there has been a failure of wireless communication. It has recovered. To understand a little bit about where secular deification might come from, I want to introduce what some call the God of classical theism, or God of the philosophers. If you want a vivid and a little bit punchy anti-New Atheist representation of the God of classical theism, then David Bentley Hart. People know him. He's an Eastern Orthodox. He's fun. He's a little cruel. He's sort of the antimatter Richard Dawkins. So if you like Dawkins from the New Atheist side, then if you're open to other voices, you'll like Hart from the theist side. Independent of that, and it's less snarky than one of his books that's directly just saying Dawkins is an idiot, which may well be entirely true. Maybe he's an idiot savant, very good at chicken psychology, which is his main field of scientific expertise, and less aware of philosophy and theology. But if you want an introduction to the God of classical theism, I think the experience of God is a good place to start. The basic idea behind that is a lot like what we think about with Plato's idea of the good with a capital G that is an important part of much of Christian understanding of what God is. And it's the ground of being. Without God, there could be nothing else. It's the ground of meaning. It says when we say something is good, what grounds do we have to say that it's good? Why isn't anything other than our harebrained imaginations? Well, God of classical theism, something is good because it is compatible with God, or compatible with God's nature. Crucially for Taylor's argument, God of classical theism is transcendent or supernatural, beyond what we hear beneath the moon. Sublunary is the adjective they use. We here on earth, we terrestrial beings, are a part of this immanent world that we experience and inhabit. God is transcendent. He is beyond that. God is also the order of existence, not just physical existence, but spiritual existence. The idea behind the God of classical theism is that God is something so entirely vast and great and grand that everything else depends upon God. And now there are different approaches to this in different traditions that I'm going to gloss over here. But the God of classical theism really is other than human, except through the miracle of incarnation in Christ. And that's one of the criticisms that you'll hear from Latter-day Saints against the God of classical theism, that there's such a vast separation between this antique God and humanity that it sort of doesn't make sense. Now, people who continue to believe in the God of classical theism, many of whom I love, admire, and am deeply sympathetic, I'm not trying to trash them remotely, they'll respond by saying that Christ actually solves this gap. That we tend to focus on Christ as mediating our sinfulness against God's sinlessness, and people who believe in this way would tend to think that God is also solving an ontological or an existential gap. It's not just one of sin. So here's Taylor. It's my favorite book that's impossible to read. It took me 4 years. I'm normally a super quick reader. I read most books within 2 days. This took me 4 years, in part because it was so boring. I fell asleep for the middle 2/3 of it. Brilliant and boring. For those of you that aren't theoretical physicists, it may feel a little bit like you grabbed one of Schrodinger's papers in the German and you just cannot make heads or tails of it. I have discovered if you read the first 50 pages and then skip all the way to chapter 15, and then read from chapter 15 to the end, you'll get what he's saying, and you won't have the problem with the following suit. So I say that because I hope some of you go and buy this, but don't be mad at me when you get to page 51 and you're like, Dagnab, I really have got to go check Facebook for the next 3 years. If you want to understand a little bit more about it, I personally, if you've got a bit of an academic bent, there's a collection called Varieties of Secularism in a Secular Age that Harvard published afterwards. If you want just the devotional take on it, there's a guy named Smith that wrote a book called How Not to Be Secular. He is, as I recall, he's a Calvinist, he might be Episcopalian, Catholic, Taylor's Catholic. So Smith is writing from a high-church Protestant perspective, and it's sort of a Cliff's Notes to Secular Age. So if you're approaching it devotionally, I go to Smith. If you're approaching it academically, I would probably read this Varieties of Secularism. This is a little easier to get through, and it's leading up to it. I'm going to play with it a little bit here, but it has to do with our notion of the self. So essentially what Taylor is saying is, around 1500, if you didn't believe in God in some way, you were a lunatic. In 2000, if you believe in God, people look at you a little funny. And even if they don't look at you funny, they're well aware that not believing in God makes perfect sense to you. And Taylor's trying to understand, how is it that we go from a situation where belief in God is as natural as taking a breath, to a situation where belief in God is something that you come to with great stress and difficulty and second guessing. Always aware that there are bright, good people who will disagree with you about it. Crucially, what is transcendent becomes immanent. And he talks a lot about the immanent frame. And what he means by that is, where we used to believe there was more than just physical, normal, banal experience. We used to believe in angels and demons and God and perhaps other gods populating the world beyond our simple seeing, we no longer, many of us, I don't mean you in the room, I'm talking about society at large in the West, no longer believe that there's anything other than what we can see, feel, and touch, and perhaps what we can measure with a photometer. There's an incredible focus, and there's two things going on in this last statement. One is the individual as opposed to the community, and the other is earthly as opposed to heavenly flourishing. Taylor makes a lot of the fact that with the Protestant Reformation in the years that come after it, people increasingly say, who cares about the darn monks? Before 1500, the point of the monks was that they were holier than the rest of us, so that we could actually have a decent, pleasant life and still be on speaking terms with God. The idea was that monks were holier, and that they therefore had to do a work so that not all of us had to do the work. The point was you had to go about your life. You wanted to be able to let loose a little bit around the time of Mardi Gras or equivalent. You didn't want to have to just be fit and all that religious stuff. You still wanted as a society to be right with God. Monks were sort of like the conscience or the better nature of that society. And crucially, back before 1500, people recognized that they were not holier than the monks, that the monks were a little better than they were. And they were okay with that, because they had other things they wanted to do in their lives. Increasingly, earthly rather than heavenly flourishing, success in life rather than being at peace with or on good terms with God became the priority. And you see a lot more. This is frankly the genesis of what people will call the prosperity gospel. I don't know how many of you have heard of this in American evangelical Protestantism. It's not so uncommon to have churches where the clear teaching over the pulpit is if you pray and donate to the pastor, you're going to make it, you're going to get rich. It's sort of a scheme. You do your little bit, God will give you lots of money. We know whether you're righteous depending on what kind of insignia is sitting on the front of your car. That's the prosperity gospel. And that is, in part, an incorporation of secularity into evangelical Protestant worship, specifically that sense that God cares a ton about how much we flourish or how wealthy we are in life, rather than caring more about our eternity. And Taylor uses, there's some kind of, is the NSA observing us here? There's some sort of interference with the wireless on my pointer. So within, and Taylor, for your reference, calls that Secularity 3. And when you hear Taylor and secularism or secularity, it's always his third sense. First sense is just the division of church and state that everybody knows about, that we're quite comfortable with. Secularity 2 is the question, mostly in Europe, of whether people attend church on a regular basis. And Secularity 3 is the change in what Taylor calls the conditions of belief. He argues that modern selves are buffered from both the supernatural. You're no longer worried that somebody's going to cast a spell that's going to ruin your life, but they're also increasingly buffered from their communities. More and more, the idea about what makes sense in a life is defined idiosyncratically without reference to the rest of the community. And increasingly, people are asked to bear a burden I don't think they can bear, which is to generate not just their own decisions, but the framework in which their decisions make sense. Utter idiosyncrasy of the good, isolated to each individual skull and the brain that resides within it. And crucially, they're pulled out of the chain of being. The chain of being was crucial to this God of classical theism, and it was the notion of hierarchy that exists in the natural world and in our social world. And we all had a place within that chain of being. Humans were less than angels, fish were less than horses, donkeys were less than cheetahs. There was a sense of hierarchy that was everywhere, and we made sense within our place. The chain of being also extended to societies. You have the king, that's the divine right of kings, that comes from chain of being. Then you have the gentry, and you have the clergy, etc. Now this is the classic secular critique, and you'll hear it on the lips of people like Richard Dawkins in his ilk, that there's this idea that you don't need God as the glowing grandpa. The new atheist uses lots of different ways to describe it, but they're talking about it's a caricature of God. I don't endorse it, but they talk about it as if God is a giant fairy. He's like the fairy godfather, right? And that's the caricature of ancient and Christian beliefs about God. And increasingly, secular selves are proposed as no longer needing anything like God, which anyway was just the giant fairy godfather to start with. And we it's a very libertarian view, and I know that some of you will be libertarian, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I'm trying to describe where some philosophies come from and how they're nourished. And there's a sense in which contemporary libertarianism is very much a part of this secular worldview, specifically making the argument that the only person who can decide what matters for the individual, unless they hurt someone else, is that individual. And I think as you really start to understand a little bit more about secularity and secularism, you'll see that all of us, even good people with good ideas, have incorporated aspects of this secular understanding. So I'm mentioning libertarianism not to be a jerk. I'm actually not a libertarian. I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but only to help you understand a little bit about the political contexts in which these ideas take place. And this leads us to the contemporary situation. And here, this was a very thoughtful gentleman that I went to college with, that I really like and respect, put this on his Facebook page. I don't think he realized that it was from this book or by this woman, but he sort of liked it. And this woman, she's a coach on call with a registered trademark. Is that what it is? She says that she does extreme self-care. If you want to live an authentic, and this word authentic is a buzzword of the secular self, meaningful life, you need to master the art of disappointing and upsetting others, hurting feelings, and living with the reality that some people just won't like you. It's essential if you want your life to reflect your deepest desires of value. And then down here you can see the fine part, which I love. In the event you use any of the information in this book for yourself, which is your constitutional right, the author and the publisher assume no responsibility for your actions. So if as soon as you embrace extreme self-care, the people in your life hit you with plywood to make you shut up about being such a narcissist, they disclaim any responsibility for the philosophy that drove you to it. Bear in mind, so I read this and I think there probably are some people who are so imbalanced in a pathologic relationship that they've been unable to bring the Spirit of Christ that resides in them into a conversation with the Spirit of Christ residing in others. And for those people, I think what they need is cognitive behavioral therapy, good pastoral counseling, a new look, not the art of extreme self-care from the coach on call. But there probably are people for whom a call to be just a little bit more aware of yourself is important. But primarily what I just see this as a call to live the modern secular self. You come first, you're the ground of your own being. Other people, if they get in your way, they're a problem. If you've got some bizarre, idiosyncratic requirement that you'd like to impose on 25 different people, if they're not ready for that bizarre, idiosyncratic requirement to be placed on them, it's their own fault. They can read it in the Art of Extreme Self-Care. And we lead to this narcissistic, atomistic society that's nonsense. And then just this morning, as I was working on this talk, across my Facebook feed, there's this sweet young man that I knew at a prior period of my life who's been a little bit obsessed with cars. 5 minutes. 5 minutes left? Okay, let me cut through then. I'll cut the chase. He said, I've been too selfish, I need to be less selfish. And his Facebook feed rushed to tell him, you're not selfish, you work hard and should enjoy life. He said, I really shouldn't be spending all my money on cars, I should be cultivating deeper relationships. I've been too selfish. And this was the jump response with a wink emoticon from Facebook. Oh, and then we're going to have to skip this, but when I was talking to my wife last night about this is that guy who got the Oscar, and he said, oh, and my hero is me. And he went on at length talking about his hero was himself. And I think that's the reductio ad absurdum of the secular self. I think since we're out of time, my hero.
That's who I chase.
And he says, it's me, by the way. Then you have these things that are clearly trying to sell us money. Dare to defy, be different than everyone else in your life. Oh, so that you can absolutely conform with our entertainment system and watch our TV. So there's this, you're never quite free of it all. I went on longer than I meant to. So that's secular deification. And if you notice, What it's saying is if God is dead, somebody has to fill the void left by the absence of God, and the person who will fill it is the utter narcissist. And I think that I'm being a little bit sharp here, but I think it's not untrue to say that there are real risks to that model of secular deification. But then here's the rub for us as Latter-day Saints. We don't endorse the God of classical theism either. We also suggest that humans are divine beings in some way. And how are we different? And I call it the divine anthropology in some writing, but it's the idea that God and human beings are the same. I wrote a paper some years ago. It's in my history book, In Heaven as It Is on Earth. It talks about the early Mormon chain of belonging, which is really a kinship. It's a family tree that replaces the old, strictly hierarchical chain of being. And I didn't realize that there actually is a city of Enoch on the earth. It's not, this is their city logo, and this is what they have on their webpage. But notice that the city of Enoch in the book of Moses is a story about a community being saved together. Not being saved as isolated individuals, but being saved together, as a community, as a kinship. And there's a sense in which in Mormonism we see an acknowledgement that we're embedded. It is true that we all carry a divine spark, but it's a divine spark that lights the divine fire in relationships of mutual love, regard, and kindness. Modeled, crucially, I think this is very clear in the LDS scriptures, on the relationship between a parent and a child. Not that people who are not parents can't experience it. Not at all. Experience it freely, even if you have no biological children. But it's crucially that kind of love, automatic, visceral, self-sacrificing, based in a deep sense of a shared identity, that is the foundation of all of our experience. I do some work in my day job in complexity analysis and understanding complex networks. This is only here to indicate that it's a lie. It's a fiction that human individuality is itself a necessary part of the universe. Because in fact, we're much more complicated above us, and we're much more complicated below us. And you really choose in a circular way the given scale that you're interested in looking at. And once you say, I'm going to look at the scale of the individual human being, then you say, oh, look, individual human beings are something that need to have precedence over everything else. So there's a factual problem here. I've run out of time to pursue this, and I'll do this in another essay or setting. But it's occurred to me that we have a notion of eternal law, particularly in the Pratt Brothers' writings, that is a lot like the God of classical theism. It's that we also have a sense that Elohim, God the Father, and God the Mother, as we're increasingly acknowledging, are a part of this chain of belonging, this family tree that provides the ground and meaning and being of us. And our divinity flows out of precisely that. And I won't go into the deep theology here, in part because I don't think I have a clue yet what it actually is. But it occurs to me that there's something about God the Father and his wife, God the Mother, that embody and embed the divine order of love, of which our sense of the love of a parent for a child is a kind of copy or an instance. And it seems to me that there's something about the way in LDS theology we have the eternal law, much like the God of classical theism, and we have God the Father and his Son Jesus mediating our entry into that. And it occurs to me that we all are a part of incarnation in a way that is distinctive. As we become better friends with other Christians, and I think we ought to, as we become better friends with other Christians, and here I'll pause just for a moment and honor the passing of Dr. Webb. I think it's been mentioned before, he was supposed to be here. It's a desperate tragedy that he's gone. He was one of these people, a convert to Catholicism, who thought, well, who admired us and whom we admired. That kind of conversation is very important. And he, before his death, did some of the good thinking that many of us as Latter-day Saint thinkers will also contribute to around these questions of what does make LDS Christianity different from other forms of Christianity. And it occurs to me that one way that we are different relates to this sense in which we participate in the miracle of incarnation, not just because Jesus loves us and has saved us, but at some deeper ontological, metaphysical level. It's deep stuff. And you can imagine it being permuted or confused into some life coach thing about get the divine within and ignore all these idiot schlubs that are not divine. You can't do that in Mormonism. You cannot be divine alone in Mormonism. And on that, I'll close. Thank you.
So, we have some questions.
Oh, we're doing questions? I'm sorry. We might do this.
Here's one.
In red pen. Is the non-existence of a God as a role model creating a discontinuity from deity, and we look to you such as athletes to find one's work? I think that's a phenomenal question, and it is one of the weak points in the preachiness of the Dawkins and company. A lot of people would say that we look to celebrities because we don't have a royal family, that celebrities play the role of an aristocracy. And I think one of the reasons, frankly, that there's so much plastic surgery on the Wasatch Front is because it's become an avenue to an aristocratic standing. Our aristocratic class are the Hollywood stars and the athletes. They all look ultra fancy. They're all sculpted. Well, part of our wanting to be like them is being sculpted in a similar way. So it's reasonably clear to me that celebrities and athletes are our aristocracy, and it will always have a reverential feeling toward them. The question I think you're asking is a parallel one that I'm less sure of the answer to, and that's whether the death of God means that we hold even more tightly onto those kinds of earthly exemplars. I think that's probably true, but I don't know that I have a firm sense that that's what's going on. But it's a good question. Because that's the thing. We needed God, right? I mean, the honest atheist, like, what's her name? Is it Palea? The atheist who said that God is the smartest thing humans ever invented, right? That's the honest atheist. Because if you don't got it, there's got to be something else instead. How do you suggest meeting the needs of the individual and the needs of the community within an LDS context? But I think this is the work of salvation. I may have mumbled that. How do you suggest mediating the needs of the individual and the needs of the community within an LDS context? I think this is the hard work. I think when we say, oh, no, there's no tension there, there's no difficulty, that we're missing the stuff that makes us divine, and it's the figuring out. I don't know the answer. I think it comes in a context of prayer and fasting and reading scripture, but it also comes from an attitude of listening and of service. And I'm a very odd person that I just have had to come to terms with that. And I think if I were an ardent secularist, I would be advertising that as the greatest thing about me. I'm aware that it's just part of it, like the color of my hair or the fact that I don't like to wear a tie. Not probably that important, but still a part of me, so I need to figure out how to integrate it into the community. And I'll tell you, when I was in my mid-20s, I was much more narcissistic. I would routinely make really dramatic, overstated political comments during Sunday school. Just, I'm a lefty who admires and respects good people of all persuasions. Back in my 20s, I was just an ardent lefty, right? I was like, George Bush is the Antichrist. Drop the mic, right? That was my model of how I was going to participate in the LDS community. I would be that spice. And now I think, what a self-absorbed dork I was in my middle 20s. Most of us were that way. So part of it is not feeling like you are the only salvation for the church. You are not the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the church. Please, you're our only hope. You're not. You're a part of what enriches it, You're part of what brings the Spirit of God into it, but you're not freaking Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I think that's a crucial part of it. And I think the physical acts of service need to keep happening. I'm tired. I work a ton. I'm a doctor, I'm a medical researcher, I do a lot of stuff. And once a month, I gotta frickin' run a vacuum cleaner through my local ward house. But I think I gotta do that. I've gotta do that because I need it. I gotta feed people who are sick or dying or have just given birth. I gotta do that. And I don't care how twisted in the knots I get about the cultural tensions, and they're real. And we're experiencing one particular one about sexual identity right now as we live and breathe it. And I think the solution, such as it is, fasting, prayer, listening, not thinking you're Obi-Wan Kenobi, and continuing to do the simple basic acts of service. This is the work of eternity. This is the work of eternity. Navigating the relationship between individual and community in the church.
Very good. Thank you very much.